Hello everybody. In this video I'll go over some of my GC to GD or GD to GC notes. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. So my first two notes are going to be mechanical. The first note is about separating the engine and trans. If you're familiar with working on the GC USDM chassis, you know that you can remove the engine just by loosening or taking off all the bolts on the bell housing and sliding the engine off. The GD is slightly different. In the pre-06 GD, the clutch fork locks the engine to the trans. So in order to separate the engine and trans, you have to remove the clutch pivot. It's kind of hidden, so the first time I did it, it took me about 10 to 15 minutes of wiggling and seeing the separation between the engine and trans, but it will not let go. The bolt is located on the driver's side of the trans. It's right near where the fork is. The next mechanical note is changing over to a GD gas tank. Depending on what year and drivetrain GC you have, there may be some changes or updates you may have to perform. My chassis is a 95 front-wheel drive, which means the charcoal canister is located under the hood, and the tank will not fit an all-wheel drive rear end. Having the canister under the hood means the tank plumbing is completely different. This should only be an issue if you have to update your tank because you have an older GC with an older canister system, or you have a front-wheel drive chassis where you have to change over to saddleback tanks. To fix this, you can pick up a newer GC tank filler, newer being I believe 97 or newer. Get a filler neck that has all the plumbing for a canister and a canister with the brackets. The symptom if you don't update these parts is that your gas tank will not breathe properly, therefore making filling up your gas tank difficult, and also it could cause damage. If you're going to install the GD tank, note that you'll have to modify the passenger side gas tank strap. If you don't know what that is, it's just pretty much a spacer. Look at the pictures. One more mechanical note or tip. When you remove a component, make sure that you keep the bolt in the same hole. Because a lot of times you'll have a component with the same head size and same thread pitch, but different length. So every time you remove something, say like a water pump, just when you remove it, put it on the side, have like a clockwise or counterclockwise orientation and know where you started. And then as soon as you take the component off, you put those bolts in their corresponding holes. This will save you a ton of time and headache in trying to figure out which bolt goes where. And you don't want to make the mistake of putting the wrong bolt in the wrong hole, leaving something up for error. Now, a lot of times also people put their bolts in boxes. Fine, but if you're going to separate your bolts, have your, okay, this is the top side of the engine bolt set of bolts. This is the lower end. This is the middle, etc. The more you separate, the more you organize, the easier the assembly is going to be. Okay, let's get into the big one, the non-mechanical harness notes. Before I start my notes on the harness, I just want to say that if you're unfamiliar with electrical diagnosis or reading diagrams, you can still do it. You just have to give yourself some time to learn. And if you know someone that does have experience in electrical, just ask them if you get stuck. Ask them for help. Push come to shove, you can always send your harness to an aftermarket company and they'll merge them for you. There are plenty of people who do that. It's a great option. But if you're willing to do it yourself, you might as well give it your best try and use decent tools. You don't want electrical problems driving down the road. That's a really good way to start a bad day. So on that note, crimpers can be very expensive. The most expensive that I've seen were aircraft grade, but you definitely don't have to go that far. I just suggest some Molex crimpers with changeable locators. I think my set cost me 40 to 60 bucks. You'll need a heat gun for a shrink tube and some wire strippers. Then I extended some wires and replaced some wires, so you might as well go ahead and buy a spool of wire or two. And of course, tape, electrical, self-healing, and cloth. All of them being decent quality and having a wide range of working temperature. Pay attention to the working temperature. You don't want to be, if you're in a colder area, you definitely don't want your wires or your tape failing. And then using solder is really a personal preference. Some people don't like to use it. Some people do. I know now, especially with CAN systems, a lot of manufacturers do not want to use solder as it adds resistance, or it could add resistance to your circuit. But if you do use it, use rosin core type. Okay, so the path that I chose to use the complete GD harness, which means I ran the GD engine and body harness through my GC chassis. I did this for several reasons, one being the GC harness was over 20 years old. A lot of the wiring insulation was very stiff and there were some dry rotted areas. And it also saved me from splicing because I was already installing the GD dash and HVAC system anyway. Quick note, the ECU bolts right in. You will not have an issue with any of that. So it's all just plug and play. Being that I had two complete vehicles, I was able to label each connector as I removed them from their component. This is a very handy thing to do. It comes handy when you're laying out your harness for splicing, and it comes handy when you're putting your harness into the vehicle itself. You'll know where all the components are supposed to go. So take time to label your connectors, wires. It's just worth it. If you just take everything out and say, I'll figure it out later, you just make more work for yourself. In terms of splicing your harness, you can choose it in the vehicle or you can do it out of the vehicle. Most people do it out of the vehicle because the wires and connectors are much easier to access and handle. I did mine in vehicle because all my vital wiring, such as my engine, trans, dash, and HVAC, it didn't really need to be touched because I was keeping everything from the GD. That being said, I did have to splice in all my body wiring, such as internal and external lighting, my window controls, the sound system, and central locking. In my opinion, those systems are pretty accessible when they're in their installed location, so I just spliced in vehicle. And even though I used the GD harness, I still had to take some off the GC harness. The GC and GD weather seals going to the doors and firewall do not match. So you have to take them off of the GC harness and put them on your GD harness. Otherwise you will have your wires and components exposed to the elements. While the harnesses were apart, I used some rubber restorer on the seals, and I definitely was not shy when it came to using quality electrical and self-healing tape. The tape that you use should have a wide temperature range and be good for high traffic use, especially when you're talking about the door jambs. I also had to take off the connectors for the GC harness. That's pretty straightforward, and if you have a proper wiring harness, it shouldn't be a problem. If you do have any issues matching your wiring harness to the diagrams, you can still successfully wire the body components. Most GC and GD body harness components use a basic positive and negative electrical system. With a multimeter and a nice power probe tool, I think you get the job done. I believe later GD models use a CAN system, which may complicate things. And if you aren't confident, there's no shame in sending out your harness. There's a couple of companies that will merge the harness for you, and it's pretty affordable. If I did this again, I'd probably send it out just to save time and energy. That being said, that's all I have for this video. If you have any questions or suggestions, let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.